Hello, welcome back to my political opinion channel, and today I'm going to be talking about why corporatism is crap. So first things first, what is corporatism? So the dictionary defines corporatism as the control of a state or organization by large interest groups. So essentially, corporatism is an economic system where large corporations work in congruency with the government to better each other and themselves, but at the same time, the whole rest of society plummets and degrades as a result of that. And we'll look into why that is and how it happens. So I talked about the political power chart a little bit in the last episode, but to explain corporatism, I'm really going to have to explain it pretty much all the way. As I mentioned in my last episode, the full political spectrum, the dual-axis political spectrum, really takes away a lot of the confusion and conflation that we have come to know as part of our political system. And the main reason that is because the way we view the spectrum currently, this one axis left versus right, is very inaccurate. And one way that it's mainly inaccurate is that instead of omitting the authoritarian axis, the left to right spectrum takes the authoritarian axis, flips it, either diagonally or really fully on its side, and it essentially says that the right wing and all of their ideologies and all of their policies are intrinsically authoritarian, whereas the left side of things are viewed as intrinsically libertarian, when this is really not true. For just as much as there is a range and a spectrum to how much commitment a system actually has to an economic ideology, in other words, an ideology could be extremely capitalistic or not very much or kind of in the middle, but as much as there exists a range from left to right, all points on that left to right spectrum also have an equal propensity of traveling up or down, or in other words, being more authoritarian or libertarian. So in the last episode, we talked about how a lot of people would probably view socialism as kind of a middle ground between capitalism and communism, and it kind of seems now like it's becoming like a golden choice especially for younger people, because of that appeal that it has, because of that inaccurate portrayal of being a middle ground. And so in the last episode I talked about how socialism is really kind of more so in this area. Again, all ideologies exist in much range on the spectrum, so really any kind of socialist ideology could be pretty much anywhere between here and here, all the way up and down. By a similar venue, I would argue that corporatism is somewhere around right there. And this may seem strange. You may be asking yourself, how could corporatism, a governmental system based upon businesses and money and a government based upon corporations, well, that has to be a capitalistic system, right? Well, here's why I would beg to differ. So one of the main reasons that I argue and reason that corporatism is somewhere in the middle of the economic axis is the main underlying aspect of capitalism in the first place, which, as you may have heard, is laissez-faire, which translates to free markets, and which is essentially the idea that the government stays out of all business practices. Citizens of that government are free to transact and do business in pretty much any way they want to, given that they're not breaking any other laws that are already established. So bearing this in mind, corporatism, the idea that you have corporations and governments working together, I mean, that's directly an immediate contradiction and infringement on the idea of laissez-faire capitalism. So pretty much right away, that's a guaranteed reason why corporatism is intrinsically anti-capitalistic. So my second reason for placing corporatism in the middle of the economic spectrum is the respective equality that each side of the economic spectrum seeks to achieve. So on the left side of the spectrum, we generally see a striving for equality of outcome, which essentially means that no matter what your place is in society, you should be able to live just as lavishly as anybody else in society. So that essentially the purest form of communism would be that everybody in the society essentially earns the same amount. from the fast food worker to the neurosurgeon who went to school for 8 to 12 years. Whereas on the other side of the spectrum, capitalism strives for an equality of opportunity. This equality also refers to a point that I made in my last video about a concept which can be described by a phrase that I coined as the freedom of ambition. And essentially what that looks like is that everybody has the same opportunity. If I want to work very, very, very hard, if I want to spend a lot of time to better myself or better my company or whatever else, if I want to spend a lot of time and a lot of work and possibly a lot of money in generating a great position for myself, I have the freedom and the flexibility to do that. Whereas in a more communist system, the government pretty much just tells you, hey, you're really smart, you're going to be a neurosurgeon, you're going to work really hard and spend most of your life studying, and you're going to make a middle-class income. On the flip side of things, still in the equality of opportunity realm, let's say that, hey, I don't really want to work a whole lot. Let's say that I want to live a middle-class life and just go into work every day and punch a time clock every day and have, a pretty average job that I worked pretty moderately hard to achieve and get myself into that position. But, I'm not really looking to work super hard and have some crazy lavish lifestyle. I can do that. Most people are fine with doing that. And then even further down, let's say that you just really don't even want to have a job at all, period. Maybe you found some other way to make money and to keep yourself sustained, and that's perfectly fine too. Capitalism is all about equality of opportunity. So viewing each side like this with their respective equality goals will help us to determine why corporatism doesn't really exist on either side. And the main argument I have to go along with that is that corporatism is essentially feudalism. And here's what I mean by that. So a very quick rundown of feudalism is that the king or the government has all the power, and immediately below that is the vassalship, the vassals or the landowners of the society. Usually born into this position, although if you chose to join the military, there was some small chance, if you survived, that you would become a vassal yourself and inherit some land from the crown. So of course the king is one person. If it's a more oligarchic system, the crown or the government would consist of more people. And then the vassalship was, of course, again, just a very small sector of the society. But most people found themselves as part of the serfdom. Most people were knaves, essentially slaves. They were just laborers for their vassals. They essentially got paid in room and board and food costs. And they worked in order to live, much like extreme pure communism, where currency and monetary systems essentially don't exist, and people go to work in exchange for the government providing for them. Similarly, as everyone in the serfdom was living in essentially pseudo-communism, everybody in the vassalship lives in essentially pseudo-capitalism, where they have a tremendous amount of freedom and flexibility to invest in themselves or in their farms or in their serfdom. In a corporatist system, however, economic power is essentially given to certain monolithic mega corporations by the government, deciding to work with them and help them out and bail them out and all kinds of different things. And then from there, economic power is further distributed to the worker. So much like feudalism, when you have the government involved in economics, the lifestyle that you have and the choices that you have are very dependent upon your class and financial standing. For instance, just as in feudalism, the corporatists have essentially become the new vassalship, and they have an amazing amount of flexibility to invest either in themselves or their companies, or to choose to even be able to choose what they want to do with their lives. Whereas the working class essentially becomes the new serfdom, where everybody might have different jobs, and people might work, longer hours and harder hours and make more money than other people. But compared to these corporatists who oftentimes, again, were just born into these positions, really have a lot more freedom and flexibility to choose what they want to do, including buying further kickback from the government. So to truly understand what corporatism is and how it arises in a society, and most importantly, how it differs from capitalism, we really have to take a deep dive into what is capitalism and how does capitalism work. Alright, so key to capitalism is the concept of competition. When businesses compete against each other, the populace always benefits for it. For businesses are not competing only for consumers, but also for laborers. So how the consumer benefits is that while stores are competing against each other, the way they garner that consumer base is from having high quality of products and low prices, amongst other things, but that's the main gist of it. When competing for laborers, businesses acquire those good laborers by providing a high quality work environment as well as fair compensation. So of course a lot more goes into business practice than just selection and pricing, but this is a great illustration I can use to emphasize the importance of competition in a free market economic system. So we can see here that between stores 1 and 2, store 2 obviously has slightly higher prices. They're not that much higher, but they're a little bit higher. However, on the flip side, they also have a better selection. And, that can be enough to keep that business going, sure. Because there's going to be enough people who go there for the selection, and while they're there, they're going to have to make a whole nother special trip to go somewhere else, i.e. store number 1, to get a better deal for everything else. Chances are they're just going to say, hey, you know what, we're already here, let's just get everything we need here. Of course, there are going to be those frugal people in society who say, hey, we can get everything we need from store number 1 except for that one thing. We may as well pay super cheap prices on everything that we need except for that one thing. But if we look at store number 3 over here, sure, we can see that he has the superior selection compared to his competitors, but he is ripping his customers off like crazy. And most likely, most of his customers are going to know that, and they're going to catch on pretty quick, and store number 3 probably going to go out of business pretty quick. This illustration, of course, works just as well with the issues of labor. Word gets around pretty quick which employers are good employers and which employers are bad employers. And similarly, it all comes around to the concept of competition ultimately benefiting the populace. Another thing to understand, however, that the way businesses like this are able to compete against each other is not at all in the same way that monolithic megacorporations compete against each other. Capitalism is all about small business. When you have small business, that's when you really have competition. When you enter the more corporatist side of things, when everything's a corporation, basically each corporation specializes in one specific thing. And when they become the dominant business, it's not a true monopoly, but it pretty much is a monopoly because they have such a stronghold on the industry. So corporatism ultimately leads to the death of competition and the rise of pseudo-monopolies. And I say pseudo-monopolies because these industries are most of the time broken down into just 2 or 3 corporations running the whole show. And if you only have 2 or 3 corporations specializing in that industry, you do have something very close to a monopoly because everybody is still very limited to where they can go to acquire that product. So now that we know what corporatism is, and how it differs from capitalism, let's take a look at the way in which corporatism has found itself in our modern society. Now, there are probably many different reasons for this, but the main reason that I cite would be corporate lobbying, which essentially works like this, where corporations pay off lobbyists, and the lobbyists use that corporate money. Sure, they take a healthy chunk for themselves, but they use that money to influence the government. And this influence comes down to benefit the corporation in a variety of different ways, mostly including bailouts and changes of policy or lack of change in policy. A lot of times corporations like the status quo because sometimes the status quo is very regressive and it benefits them instead of the populace. But essentially, in a society and an economic system where government involvement in business and business involvement in government is supposed to be limited to absolutely nothing, this is a completely legal way for corporations to basically pay off the government in exchange for governmental assistance and aid and, in other words, a leg up over their competitors, which again leads into the death of competition, which leads into these, monolithic megacorporations getting bigger and bigger and bigger until, they may not have a true monopoly, but, when there's only 2 corporations in the entire country where you can buy a certain product from, the populace's hands are still tied. Alright, thanks everybody for watching. I hope you liked it, I hope you learned something, and I hope you don't take my word for it. I really want everybody to kind of do their own research and find their own answers, instead of just going with whatever the crowd is saying, or just, taking a YouTuber's word for it or something. But if you like the video, please leave a like and a subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. It'll help me get more content out in the future. So tune in next time when I'll be talking about true capitalism, what it actually looks like, and how it really works.